ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's so I remember right. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, ghosts in the hallway whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
Good morning, monsters, and welcome to this week's episode of Monsters on the Edge here on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Barnaby Jones, and today's show is going to be pre-recorded, just so that everyone knows. If you're making comments or questions and we're ignoring them, that's why. We are not live in studio today. We have a great show today. We're going to dive deep into the legend and lore of Lake Okanagan and the legendary beast of Ogopogo. But before we get into that, guys, if you want to come out and see the Caps team in person, we are going to be at the Bell City Paracon coming up November 2nd in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It always throws me off. It says Summers, Wisconsin, but it's not. It is Kenosha. That's where the address is. And we are going to be at CryptidCon in Lexington, Kentucky, coming up the end of November, and in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, November 30th at Metapara Pros Soul and Synergy Expo. You can also find me all over Wisconsin this October. There's a lot of library presentations coming up. You can find all of that and more at wisconsincaps.com. Click on our public events tab. If you want to show your support for all things here on the Untold Radio Network, like, share, and subscribe. Here's how.
Hey, Untold Radio Network fans. Want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
All right, guys. My guest here today is Jason Hewlett. He is a paranormal investigator, researcher, author, and filmmaker from British Columbia, Canada. He is the co-creator, writer, and director of the award-winning web series We Want to Believe, and the author of 4 books, the most recent being The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster, from Small Town Monsters Publishing. He's here to talk about all things Ogopogo. Welcome to the show. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, how's it going, Barnaby?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great, man. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, it is my pleasure. I always love having guests on that are weird and cryptidy that aren't Bigfoot. Like I said before the show, I love Bigfoot. You know, I think that they're really interesting. You know, we go out looking for them and stuff, everything here in Wisconsin, but there's only so much Bigfoot you want to talk about before you want to talk about something else, because there's so many other cool cryptids and creatures that are out there. And you have written an entire book on one. So we are going to dive deep into this. You like that? Dive deep.
No, that's good. I use that pun a lot myself when talking about Ogopogo.
I'm sorry, I stole it from you then. Awesome. You have a brand new book out a couple months ago at this point, but your new book out now is from Small Town Monsters Publishing, The Legend of Ogopogo. Tell us about the book.
Well, yeah, the book is actually supplementary to the documentary Cursed Waters, Creature of Lake Okanagan, which by now is actually out. Came out on August 13th. And so the book, it was funny because I started researching the book in like January of 2023, because I live in a place called Kamloops, British Columbia, which is 2 hours north of Kelowna, which is on Lake Okanagan. So I grew up hearing all about Ogopogo. I mean, it's been part of the local folklore for actually, if you go back thousands of years, if you look at the indigenous tribes who were first settled here. So it was a story I grew up with. I mean, my family would go on holidays to Kelowna quite a bit, and I'd have to go to the Kelowna Park where there's this statue of Ogopogo in the park. You know, I've heard the stories. I have an uncle who believes he saw Ogopogo at one point, even though he's not a believer in cryptids or anything like that. So it's just, I wanted to sort of take a deep dive into the lore and see how much I could learn about it. And when I went into it, I thought I was going to be writing a book that was going to be just, a bunch of Ogopogo sightings. But the more I researched, the more I learned that there's a lot more to the story than just a bunch of sightings, even though it is probably the most documented lake monster in the world. And about the same time I was researching that, I was talking with Eli Watson from Small Town Monsters. I was writing a Paranormality magazine article about him. Eli and I have known each other for years, just because of the work we do, etc. And at that point, after the interview, he's like, "What do you got going on later this year?" And I'm like, I don't know, working on a bunch of stuff. And he's like, because we're going to be coming up to British Columbia, like the whole Small Town Monsters team. They're going to be going to Harrison Hot Springs to work on the Trail of Bigfoot, the origin. And Eli's like, but Seth's given me, a couple of days to go do my own thing. So I was going to go up to Lake Okanagan and I was going to do something on Ogopogo. Do you want to come along? And I'm like, well, I'm researching a book on Ogopogo, so it sounds like a pretty good opportunity to do that. And so basically we kept in touch. And so we met in May of 2023 in Kelowna, and we worked on what became Cursed Waters, the documentary, and a lot of the interviews I'd lined up for the book translated over into the film. And so the book is like, part of it is just sort of, researching Ogopogo, talking with the skeptics, with Ken Gearhart. I talked with Ken Gearhart, of course, who's a renowned cryptozoologist, got a whole bunch of information. And then another part of the book is like an adventure story of us working on the documentary and what kind of came up through doing that. And then at the end, I kind of draw some conclusions, which some might find controversial, but it just, through the telling of this story, it's just the way that the direction went. So the two kind of, you can read the book and you can watch the documentary and you get something new out of both of them. They kind of complement each other rather nicely. So the book is just a nice little companion piece to that. And it's probably, now that it's all told, probably one of the, I think I've written, it's my 4th book, I think, in the way it's my best book. It's the way it's my most personal book at the same time. And it's been so far really well received, which just feels really good.
Awesome. Very cool. Where can people grab a copy of that if they want one?
They can get it from smalltownmonsters.com, or you can actually order it on Amazon as well.
Very cool. And the Amazon link is in the show notes, as well as some other links for your work in there as well, so people can check that out.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so let's start here at the beginning. What is Ogopogo? Like, what is the physical description of the beast? What are people seeing, and where did the legend start?
So what people are seeing is a long serpentine creature, anywhere from like 20 to 60 feet long. The skin color, it ranges from dark green to black to brown with scales. The tail is like forked like a whale's tail. And the head has been described as looking like that of like a horse or a dragon, sometimes with a bit of a mane down it, always with horns or nodules coming out of its head. And that actually fits the description of a lot of lake monsters around the world. So a prevailing, even Loch Ness, like I know Nessie, a lot of people think it's a plesiosaur, but that's because of the surgeon's photo that was taken, which has been proven to be a hoax. A lot of the descriptions of Nessie are very similar to Champ or Ogopogo or even the Cadborosaurus off the coast of Western Canada. They're all very much the same thing, which suggests that it could all be part of this species that is as yet to be identified, and is obviously not so prolific that we see them all the time, but there's enough of them that they're all over the world and are being spotted in lakes and oceans. So that's what people have been seeing, and they've been seeing this, like settlers have been seeing it since the 1800s in that region. But the story of Ogopogo goes way back beyond that to the indigenous tribes that first settled in the Okanagan Valley. They've been seeing it for thousands of years. And to them, it is not a flesh and blood creature, although it does present itself as such from time to time. It is very much the spirit of the lake. So it is a water spirit. It's a dimension walker. It travels back and forth. It quite often is just the water itself, and occasionally manifests itself in some physical form for people to see. And they respect it. They will not travel out onto the lake without presenting sort of an offering of like tobacco or like a little bit of meat kind of thing, in much the same way that they respect the forest and Sasquatch. They travel, like they bring a rock with them into the forest that they give over to Sasquatch or Strunatum, which they call it in this local region. And that's, so for them, it's a very sacred thing. And what's happened with Ogopogo is there's sort of now two versions of it. There is the lake monster, which has actually been adopted as a tourism mascot for the Okanagan region. And then there's very much the spiritual indigenous story, which is very much an integral part of their culture. And they don't even, Ogopogo is actually a made-up word. The indigenous people don't call it Ogopogo. Ogopogo came from a song called The Funny Foxtrot, which was playing in the Vernon dance halls. Vernon's a community about 40 minutes east of Kelowna, and it's a horrible song. It's in the documentary. It's nonsensical, and it just, Ogopogo rhymed with the words that they were using to describe going looking for something in the lake. But it's basically been, everyone then associated with what people were seeing. They called it Ogopogo. Tourism Kelowna has like Ogopogo shirts, hats, stuffed animals, postcards, books for kids, you name it, it's there. But the indigenous people call it Nsnaha-Itku, and that's their water spirit. Yeah, so it's two very different things. Ogopogo being kind of the pop culture thing, and then Nsnaha-Itku, which is more the indigenous spiritual thing. So it's and I didn't know any of that going into writing the book, which is why the book changed very quickly and became a story of kind of about what's happened with almost like the cultural misappropriation of this very sacred belief system.
Now, the one thing that you said there that's really important is, there's a lot in there, but a lot of people misrepresent these beings. Like you said, around the world, you have these same type of creatures, lake monsters and stuff, and everyone thinks that they are the plesiosaurs or the I can't pronounce the lasmiosaurs or whatever those guys are, the long neck water creatures, kind of like in the little logo over
yep
there.
Yeah, very much that.
Yeah. And but they're not. Like, all over the world, they're seen as more as these long serpentine creatures. Right.
Yes.
I mean, all through history, you have your explorers like Columbus and the Vikings and stuff that have sailed around the world, all report these sea serpent beings, but they are these giant, like dragon-esque or water serpents. So I think that's a very key point to this, that people are misrepresenting these things. So
even if you look at the old maps, seafaring maps, where they put like, here there be dragons, it was always a long serpentine creature, right? Which I thought, once I kind of realized, that's like, aha, so people have been seeing whatever this is for hundreds of years all over the world, as long as we've been exploring and traveling on the world's oceans, right?
Absolutely. All right, so we got a good basis here on the history of this. So, what really brought this to the forefront? Like, when did people start seeing more or having these actual evidential encounters?
Well, yeah. So like I said, like the indigenous people have been seeing it for thousands of years, but it's when the first European settlers came into the region. So Susan Allison was the European settler, and she and her husband settled on Lake Okanagan. The home still stands to this day. It's actually part of a winery. And I've been there, and you can kind of look down and you can see out over the water. And she reported and even wrote in her journal that she saw what she described as like a dinosaur in the water. And this would be around 1880 something, in that range there. So that's kind of her first real documented encounter. There's also John McDougall, who was around that time as well, and his story is the only one that shows Ogopogo or Ntsmaha-Itku behaving in any form of aggressive fashion. And that's where he went out on the water and he was crossing it in his canoe, and he was bringing horses with him that he tethered to the canoe with a rope. And so he's in the boat and they're swimming across, and the horses start getting pulled under kind of one at a time. And he's actually forced to cut the line with a knife for fear of his boat getting pulled under with it. And he went and attributed that to the lake monster, which that's like, again, that's the only sort of aggressive account of associated with Ogopogo. It could have just been that the horses got tired and the lake has a current and they started getting pulled under because he's being a jerk and hauling them across this lake. But it's been attributed to Ogopogo. And it's interesting because apparently he didn't respect the stories when he went out onto the water. So he didn't make any kind of offering as well. So people associated with that. And the European settlers would see the indigenous people making an offering, but it went from like, the factual little slices of meat to them saying they were sacrificing goats and horses and chucking them into the water to feed this lake demon. And so that's kind of where this notorious story came from. That's kind of where the early stories around Ogopogo were born.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have heard the story about the horses in the water, and like you said, he didn't make the tributes before he crossed, and the native people kind of believed that, well, you didn't tribute, and Ogopogo thought that the horse was the tribute and came up for it. So
and pulled it down.
Well, thank you. This is good. Yeah, you're most generous.
And it was kind of interesting because that sort of set off, like when they would there's actually newspaper stories where there'd be people watching the lake with rifles in case Ogopogo showed itself. And they'd even have, like on ferries, they'd have a notice that they've got Ogopogo repellent measures in place to sort of, if it surfaced and attacked the boat, they would shoot at it or do stuff to scare it off. Although it never did. That never happened. But it was interesting how that little bit, that one story set off a whole run of paranoia that lasted a good long time in association with the lake monster.
I would think if they needed basically like Dragon Guard on the boats, that this thing would have been proved to exist already by the amount of attacks and sightings that required having guards on board. So
to shoot at it, yeah, no, like could you imagine? Like people wouldn't have settled there. They would have never gone out on the water. There'd have been no more sightings. People have been too scared to be around it. So, but that's what kind of what happens though, right? People let that story get to them and it spooks them and they just run with it.
Absolutely. All it takes is one story to get passed around and becomes the narrative. So,
yeah.
Oh, wow. How does Lake Okanagan compare with some of the other lakes like Loch Ness as far as like the depth and the size of these?
They're very like Lake Okanagan and Loch Ness are actually very similar. They're long, narrow glacial lakes, very deep. several hundred feet. Some even say that Lake Okanagan is up to 1,000 feet deep in some spots. Like there's a silt layer, and then there's like a whole bunch still to go beneath that, which lends some people even say it's bottomless. Lake Okanagan is a bit longer than Loch Ness, for sure, but they're only separated by a few degrees of latitude. And if you look at the stories around lake monsters, all of them are sort of within the same geographical belt around the world. It's actually even referred to as the lake monster belt, which I find is quite interesting as well. Narrow Valley are up here at sort of the northern tip of the same sort of semi-arid desert where Las Vegas is in. So in the summers get hot, like right now it would be your equivalent of like in the 90s Fahrenheit. When we're recording this, but in the winters it gets really cold as well, like minus 40 Celsius. The lake does not freeze over though at all, and a very good salmon population in the lake. Which is also much like Loch Ness, for salmonoid fish species in there, which if something were to live in that lake, it would have an ample food supply as well. So that's there's a lot of similarities amongst these, especially the two prominent lakes, Okanagan and Loch Ness, but these other lakes as well, like Champlain, etc. Although those other lakes aren't necessarily long and narrow, they're various shapes and sizes.
Interesting. Very cool. So what are some more of the modern sightings of this? What have you documented, and what are witnesses saying about this?
Well, the most recent one that I've documented in the book, Dale and Colleen and Myrna, they're the ones that took the picture that circulated in October of 2022. I don't know if you've seen that. It made the rounds, kind of went viral all over the world. And they got a picture of something just below the water surface with this nodule sticking up through the water.
Oh, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've probably seen it, and people say it's an upside down duck, or it's a dog, or it's a fox, or a decaying crawfish. But we went out with them. Like I've been out in their boat, Eli and I, Eli who directed Cursed Waters, we went out in the boat with them to the spot where they had their sighting, and there'd be no way a dog would be swimming out there at that time. The head, as they describe it, is 3 feet wide, so it'd have to be a really big decaying crawfish. And the picture that they took below the water is very reminiscent of what people have described the head to look like, the head of Ogopogo to look like. And we've even have the picture of it. We take it up next to the statue, and even though the statue is a bit of a more kid-friendly, cartoonish picture, it looks very much the same. You can see the eyes, the long face, the snout, the horns. And if you look carefully at the picture, there's even like a long, narrow neck that disappears deep into the water there. At that point, we were about 250 feet. It couldn't have been a dead head, because that would have been a big tree stuck to the bottom. There's no way. There's other debris in the water when we were there, bouncing up and down. And they're very genuine. Like all three of them were very genuine. They never, looked for money or anything like that. They just saw something that they couldn't quite explain and wanted it out there just because maybe there was a risk to boaters if it was some debris. Like they saw it in the water, circled around to get a better look. And as they were approaching it the second time, that's when Colleen took the picture, because it was just there. And it was almost like beneath the surface, like looking at them, watching them as they came up in their sailboat. So they took the picture and they got out of there just in case. Because they're in a sailboat. Their getaway speed is very slow. As Dale was saying, right? So that's the most recent. And that was in October, which makes sense. That's when we have our salmon run, when all the salmon go spawning from the ocean up into the rivers. So there's a large influx of salmon in the water. They were the only boat on the water at that point. So, the sailboats are quiet. It would make sense if there is an aquatic creature. A lot of motorboats, you wouldn't see it so much in the summertime because of all the traffic, etc. So it lent itself to it. And by the end, like by the time we were finished making the documentary, and I was finished writing the book, like I was convinced they got a picture of Ogopogo, probably the most recent picture, and a very compelling one as well.
Yeah, you make a good point there as well. Ken Gerhard believes that, we used to have a lot more sightings of these sea monsters and lake monsters and stuff, but that was because all of your ships that sailed the ocean were big sailing ships and stuff with the big wind sails. And now with the big motors and generators and stuff, these ships make so much noise that anything that's out there is scared away, and it keeps its distance. And that's why we're not having these more sightings of these creatures that were legendary, from sailors around the world.
I agree. And I think, like a lot of people, as we did, like you go out during the day. So I would almost argue that the expeditions, if you're going to really go and take a look, go out at night and see what you can find. Because it's probably, if it is this flesh and blood thing, would be more of a nocturnal creature then, because the lakes are quieter. There's not as much traffic on it. It would just make sense to do a nighttime search.
So is there any like underwater caves or caverns or passageways that link Okanagan to other areas, the ocean, the sea, or any other bodies of water?
Yeah, there's the Columbia River, which does come up from the coast and makes its way up through Lake Skaha and then eventually into Lake Okanagan. So there is a pathway to the ocean that way. And at Rattlesnake Island, which is believed to be the home of Ogopogo, that's where even the indigenous people say that's where Ogopogo lives. The caves have been seen underneath Rattlesnake Island. They've even had, divers have been down and they've had water coming back through the caves up into Lake Okanagan as well. And there's a belief, especially amongst the indigenous people, that all the lakes are connected. So if there's a creature there, it could pass from lake to lake using this underwater tunnel system. In fact, Shuswap Lake, which is only about like an hour and a half northeast, where I spent a lot of time growing up, has Shuswagi, which is not a very well-documented lake monster, but there has been sightings of it in the lake, and it looks exactly like the same description as people are seeing with like Ogopogo and other species around there. So it does make sense then that there could be a connection between those two lakes as well.
Interesting. So it could be that this creature is swimming between different areas and stuff, and that's why we're not finding it.
Yeah, and I mean, if that would also make sense, then you wouldn't see it as much, because if there's a very few of them, they're going to take, you're not only going to, if they're moving from lake to lake or back out to the ocean and back, you're not going to have as many sightings. I think the only thing that gets in the way of that is there hasn't been sightings so far, like in the Columbia River, of anything. But again, who knows if it's more of a nocturnal, it might be moving around at nighttime, so you just wouldn't see it anyways.
Interesting. So is there any patterns of sightings that you've been able to recognize, like more sightings during the salmon spawning, or any kind of other biology creatures moving in and out of there that have led to more sightings or less sightings, times of the year, so forth?
There doesn't seem to be like any particular rhyme or reason, like in terms of time of year, etc. Definitely there's a lot more in the Rattlesnake Island, Squally Point area, which supports the theory that that's its home, and plus a few other key areas around the lake, the names of which escape me at this time. But there isn't sort of one time of year or anything like that where there are these sightings. They seem just sort of to be random, really. What's interesting is Ogopogo, I think, is the only lake monster where it's been sighted by multiple people at the same time. In fact, somewhere's up of a dozen to 15 at once. There's some compelling video evidence. Of course, there's the Folden film that was shot in the 1960s. Art Folden and his family were driving along Highway 97. They saw something in the water, pulled off, got out. He broke out his camera and started shooting footage of this thing. And it shows it going across the lake and even diving under the water at one point and resurfacing. There's other video of which is kind of interesting. I can't remember who shot it, but it's a water skier, and he's there's three things moving in the water which are unidentifiable, and it's almost like he kind of comes into frame, sees it, and almost like lets go because there's these three things in the water around him, which I think is kind of interesting as well. There's a gentleman who is swimming across the lake for charity, and he reports that as he was swimming, like, he saw 2 or 3 smaller Ogopogos kind of come up and swim alongside him, and there's a few points where he had to get out of the water onto the boat because he was a bit spooked by it, but he kept getting back into the water and they'd kind of come up and swim with him. So just things like that, people seeing him, like Bill Stesiak, who is a legendary Ogopogo hunter. He has ogopogoquest.com. He first saw it like in I think the 70s while driving across the bridge, and he stopped his car, literally saw it in the water and stopped his car and got out and looked, and a bunch of other people got out and looked with him and watched it swim across the water. So those are kind of the natures of the sightings that people are having. So in a way, quite dramatic, and supporting the theory that there's more than one, which I think is really quite interesting to have, like, a couple, 2 to 3 show up at the same time, especially on film, is really anomalous compared to other lake monster sightings. but at the same time, very interesting to me, especially because there's, like, again, obviously water skiing, it's in a water skiing season. Other times they're seeing it in the fall. It sort of seems to be the only time you don't really hear a lot is in the winter, but people aren't out on the water so much. So if you're in visiting Lake Okanagan, you could almost have a good chance of seeing it anytime.
That's really cool. It sounds like it's a very well documented, like you said, like it seems like more active than Loch Ness.
Definitely. I mean, I know in the last few years there's been quite a few Nessie sightings. And since 2022, I believe there's only been one or two more Ogopogo sightings, but they seem to kind of run in those spurts. You don't see anything for a while, and then you see more. Again, if it's traveling to the Pacific Ocean or from lake to lake, makes sense. It's passing through Lake Okanagan and people are seeing it. So that could support that theory as well.
Interesting. All right, guys, I want to remind everyone we are not live today in studio. This show is pre-recorded. But if you guys have any questions, Jason, where can people reach you, get a hold of you?
You can find me on Instagram, Jason Hewlett Official, on Facebook, Jason Hewlett. You can look me up. My profile is me holding a copy of the book. Then we have our Canadian Paranormal Society.ca website, because that's the name of the group. I'm co-founder of Canadian Paranormal Society. And we also have a Facebook page as well under the same name.
Awesome. All right, we are going to be right back after this quick break.
Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our shows, knowledgeable hosts, and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
All right, guys, we are back here on the Untold Radio Network. Today's show is pre-recorded, as I said, so if we're ignoring questions or comments, we don't mean to. We're just not live in the studio today. We are talking with Jason Hewlett. His new book is out by Small Town Monsters Publishing. It is The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster. You can get it on Amazon or at smalltownmonsters.com and check that out. Very cool. So, I had a question before I went to the break and it disappeared in my trying to figure out what I had to click on. We talked about seeing. Oh, okay, that's what it was. So, all right, let's take a look at more of the statistics of seeing these things. So, hypothetically, if these creatures are coming in at a certain time to return to like a spawning ground or something, right? Do you see any kind of pattern of like every 5 years or something, one would mature and come back? Is there any kind of pattern of when the sightings happen and then there's a bunch of them for like a year or two and then they leave again, or any kind of similarities of that?
No, not really. That's the interesting thing. Like, I mean, there's just, the only closest pattern like that Bill Stasiak did is back in the 90s. He did like a poll. I think in the first poll was like a few hundred people that lived there. Have you seen a sighting? Have you seen Ogopogo? It was some simple thing like that. And they got kind of a low number of, I think it might only been 25, 30% of people responding that they had seen it, etc. Do you believe it? It was, do you believe in Ogopogo? And it was like a low percentage. But a big, broad group of people. So, and then in the last few years, he did another one, and of a smaller demographic number, like a smaller number of people who lived on or near the lake. Have you seen it? Or if you've seen it, or if not, do you know someone who has? And suddenly that number had gone up, like exponentially. And even people responded like, I haven't, but I know of someone who did. And so that, I think, just shows more that over time, people have begun to accept Ogopogo, or the idea. Like, there's always been people who, if you grow up in the region, you've heard the stories.
Mm-hmm.
But now I think people are more willing to talk about it and report it. Because that was what it was. If you saw something in the lake, would you report it to the media? Now people are more willing to report it to the media. So I think as perception has changed around the paranormal in general and people have become more accepting, people are coming forward more saying they've seen it. So there was probably a time when, say, in the 90s, people saw something on the lake, but there weren't shows like yours around that were talking about this, right? Like, it was pretty rare for anyone to want to talk about it. And if you brought it up, people thought you were weird or some kind of kook. And I think now, because it's so much more accepted and people are becoming so much more open-minded and are not met with ridicule when they say they've seen something, I think people are now more willing to talk about it. So I'm sure over the next few years, there will be more Ogopogo sightings, because people, not that there's more Ogopogo sightings, but people are more willing to talk about Ogopogo sightings now. You know, it's pretty rare for people to bring something up that would show up in, you know, in like the paper or something like that, or on TV. I think, and remember in like the 90s, Unsolved Mysteries had bought this exclusive Ogopogo video. Some guy from the States was there, and him and shot a video of it, and it became a big deal. So it was like, you know, there was like the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. They bought rights to the video. The Inquirer bought rights to the pictures from stills from the video. And it was a big deal. And I remember my dad and I sitting down to watch this episode of Unsolved Mysteries, because this is Ogopogo on Unsolved Mysteries. That had never happened before. But the video they shot was of a beaver. Like, clearly of a beaver slapping its tail on the water, which I think met with quite a bit of ridicule, because it was some dumb city person who had never been to Canada that didn't know what this was. So you didn't hear a lot after that until Monster Quest did an episode in like 2009. You know what I mean? Like, and now, like, you know, a company like Small Town Monsters is willing to put out a documentary and have a book come out about it. I think that just shows more where we're at. So I think if patterns are now to be found, this is kind of the time when we're going to start seeing patterns, because we're going to start hearing enough about it. I guess that's a really long-winded answer to that question, but it's just, even from my experience being into this stuff for as long as I have.
It's a podcast. That's what long-winded is for. The longer you talk, the better the show.
The better the show.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. I mean, with all of this stuff, you know, Bigfoot and UFOs and paranormal, and that everyone's like, oh, it's really starting to amp up. There's more sightings, more experiences. And I don't think that's true. I really don't. I think it's just like you said, more people are willing to talk about it. It is becoming more the social norm. You know, like it seems like every so many years there's a movement, you know, like with the spiritualist movement, you know, back in the 1800s and stuff, in the 1900s, with, you know, your Ouija boards and seances and stuff, and it kind of fell off, and then it came back, and you see a resurgence, like when Ghost Hunters hit TV, and and more people want to talk about it then, and then it kind of fell off and got boring again, and now it's just everything is hitting this huge just comeback. And it's weird, because there's not really more shows, more stuff like on television. There's not like a big updraft in new content going out. It's everywhere, just completely everywhere. Like we were talking before the show, I said, driving in Wisconsin here, in a 30-minute stretch of road, there's literally 2 different billboards with Bigfoot on it, you know. One's for a casino, one's for a car, you know, and it's like, there's not related, just here it is, Bigfoot slapped in your face, you know, just in mainstream media, mainstream culture. And I think that's why more people are willing to say, I did see it, you know. And it's like, nobody's saying, oh, you're crazy anymore. They're going, oh, really? That's cool.
Or tell me more, you know, tell me more. Like, I've found that a lot. Yeah. I've people who I wouldn't even think were into this kind of stuff, if I bring it up, they're totally interested in talking about it. And I was a journalist. I was a mainstream journalist for like 10 years, from the early, you know, 2003 to 2014. And I was interested in it. And people were basically like, if you talk about this, you're not going to have a career. You won't have any credibility. You know what I mean? You know, people think you're a kook, so just shut up and don't talk about it. But I think now I'd probably be asked to write a weekly column for the paper, kind of thing. So it shows how stuff's changed in 20 years.
Absolutely. So what we talked about, the native people there believe that this is more of a spirit being and stuff, and that could possibly be. But what are some other theories as to what this is?
Well, I mean, that's sort of the camp. That the one is it is a spiritual being that shows itself only when it wants to, and then there's the other, flesh and blood. And I had to copy the book here, because Craig Gearhart names what it is. I just got to find it. Just stick with me here. Another piece of it. It's basically, he describes it as being a basilosaur or an archosaur, which roamed the planet 20 to 40 million years ago. Mammals in a snake-like form. So he thinks it could be an offshoot of one of those, or something more amphibian, an amphibious creature. Just given that the water temperatures, etc., like because it's a lake, it's Canada, it's colder, it's deeper. So that's sort of the two ideas. That it is still like the whole dinosaur theory isn't thrown out because it's not a plesiosaur, but there's the other kind, like a basilosaur, or that it is more this spiritual being. And I think I like both. I've begun to lean more towards the spiritual aspect of it, maybe because I'm also a paranormal investigator, so the concept of spirits isn't foreign to me. And I can't shake, like, the indigenous people have believed this for thousands of years. Who's to say they're wrong? You know what I mean? Especially as we start encountering more areas, like the Skinwalker Ranch phenomenon, where you have like poltergeist activity and cryptid activity and UFO activity all thrown together. Who's to say that that's all not the same thing? Ogopogo is not linked to this same phenomenon that people are experiencing all over the world, like the Mothman. John Keel talked about ultra terrestrials, etc. So I can kind of support that. Science is starting to play more into multiverse theory and string theory, etc. So it could be real. I never like explaining an unknown with another unknown as well. But I can't rule out that belief either. Same when it comes to Bigfoot. People are having Bigfoot experience. I know you're trying to avoid the topic of Bigfoot, but people are having Bigfoot experiences that definitely have a paranormal, supernatural slant to them, right? Like it's just starting to happen. And I think, again, because people are more willing to talk about those other aspects. If you remove the agenda of trying to prove something, like either scientifically or spiritually, and you're willing to let both kind of mesh together, I think you're going to get a lot closer to the answers of what this is.
I think on that line as well, you talk about, like, I know we're trying to avoid Bigfoot, but going back to Bigfoot, when people are saying that they have these, paranormal side to them or these paranormal aspects, I do a whole presentation on cryptozoology. And I talk about how all these animals we know exist, like the platypus, the Komodo dragon, jellyfish, octopus, chameleons, have such paranormal abilities of their own that just because we have now described them and studied them, well, now they're normal. Like these animals can change their colors, change their sex, their genders. All these different animals that are out there have these different abilities that are supernatural, paranormal. But because we've kept them in a jar and looked at them through a microscope, well, now they're normal, Yeah. So totally. Who's to say that all these things that are out there, we call it paranormal and metaphysical and stuff, but it's just unstudied,
I agree completely, 100%. I think eventually, maybe not in our lifetimes, but like you'll even be able to explain what ghosts are. You know what I mean? I think it's a perfectly natural phenomenon. It's just really hard to study because it's not this tangible thing. And with my team at Canadian Paranormal Society, like we try really hard to put a scientific approach to it because we want to try to get hard answers. And you're not going to get like hard answers throwing around woo-woo theories, even though if the woo-woo theory turns out to be eventually right. You've kind of got to really like do the Occam's razor approach and peel back everything else before you can start explaining it. When it comes to studying a lake monster, it's tough. It's like trying to study whales or sharks, but because it's in the water and you got to get in there and you got to find it. So I think that makes it tough. I mean, there's already been two or three expeditions in Lake Okanagan where they found evidence like sonar pings that support a large being in the lake. They've come across the tunnels with the water backflow, which supports the tunnel theory, but no one has yet to catch on film this creature or found a body of it at the bottom of the lake. But if the lake is silt and then it goes even deeper, who's to say that the bodies aren't settling below that and going even deeper? So it's very expensive to kind of research something like a lake monster, as it would be like a giant squid. I don't think we still have very much definitive on the giant squid other than we know it's real.
Just what Doug Hychek did.
Yep. Exactly. Right.
I think that's a good point as well. We got things like Bigfoot and the other creatures on land, and for lack of a better explanation, you have this 2-dimensional plane where we're chasing them through the woods and stuff, right? Well, now when you're looking at these underwater creatures, you're adding that third 3D aspect of it can go forward, backward, left, right, or up and down. So now we're chasing it in this more 3-dimensional environment, and not, you know what I mean? And instead of just this one layer, and we can't find things on one layer that we're looking for, let alone in this underwater realm of just so many places they can go and hide and up and down out of sensors and into the silt and stuff down there where, maybe our equipment doesn't reach, our cameras can't see. So you have this whole other dynamic to it.
Where there's also a danger of being down there.
Oh yeah.
Like not alone running into some aquatic beast, but just the fact that we're not made to survive in that environment, which makes it even harder, even in a lake. I think this for sports diving, I used to scuba, so you can go 100 feet, but okay, you've got down 100 feet into Lake Okanagan. You've still got like 200 to 800 feet still to go. Yep. That makes it really hard to explore, unless you can afford a submersible. So, and then Carl Sagan, actually, I remember he was talking about, I always like using this more for the ghost theory. You'd say that you take a 3D object and put it into a 2D world, so you're only seeing a dimension even of that.
Yep.
So you're not even seeing the whole bit. So if you want to look at like a paranormal Sasquatch or paranormal lake monster, you're only going to see part of it anyways if it can kind of shift in and out of that from our 2D reality back to its 3D reality. So that makes it even kind of harder to peg, which I just find it fascinating.
Oh yeah, that's amazing stuff. Have they ever tried doing submarines into the lake?
Yeah, they have. There's been a couple really big expeditions. One that was supported by like a Japanese company, I think Nippon or something like that. So they were kind of done in the late 90s and in the 2000s, and they went all out. And they spent a good amount of time. I think even like a week, sort of exploring twice, and did the whole sonar run. That's where they got the sonar ping of something large in the lake. That they couldn't explain. And then there was another expedition years after that where they did the tunnels and they had the backdraft of water come out of it. Those are the two closest bits that they had in terms of coming up with anything.
Interesting.
So not completely, didn't work, but they, still didn't get that 100% conclusive bit of evidence everyone wants from something like that. And again, those expeditions are expensive, so you can't just pull them off all the time.
Absolutely.
Most people's luck seems to have come when, like, as with any of this, when you're least expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
The cameras aren't trained.
Don't find anything. It's the average person that just happens to be in the right place at the right time.
I think so. And I think too, there's an intelligence to all this as well, right? I mean, you're dealing with something that's equally as smart as you are, and we're in its environment where it's even more adept. So yeah, I think you could be looking at this way and Ogopogo's coming up behind you kind of thing, or playing around the back of your boat or something like that. Like it's same with, we've been in homes that have been haunted and we've had no luck for 5 hours and we've packed all our gear up, and of course that's when something happens.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's the way it always goes.
Always goes.
Okay, we're done, and every piece of equipment starts going off, and you're like, well, I guess we're not done. So yep. I'm kind of, I don't know how I feel about this. Like with my team, Caps, we like to focus 100% of what we're doing on an investigation. So when we go out bigfooting in that, we have thermal drones, we have thermal imaging, we have night vision, we have audio equipment, video equipment, and everything. And, people have asked me, have you gone, we have Rocky, the Rock Lake Monster here in Wisconsin, along with like 50 other lake monsters just in our state. We have so many lakes here. And, they always say, well, have you gone out looking for this? And I say, no, because if I'm going to go out looking, I want to do it 110%. So I'm going to need sonar. I want an underwater camera. I want all this equipment that we can go out and give it 110%, because otherwise you're just wasting your time, But one of the things that I've kind of thought is that, you talked about this being like an underwater dragon type creature, right? And all through mythology, lore, all around the world, you have these stories of dragons. And in every one of these stories, what happens to the dragon? They hunt it down and they kill it. right? All through medieval times, the knights and all that stuff, the castle age, and that they've killed all these things off. Well, these are the ones that you can find on land in caves. But there's other species of, supposed dragon that are underwater. And how hard would it be to track down one of these things and kill it? So if there's still dragons out there, it's quite possible that they're the underwater type dragons. Each culture around the world has, the flying or the land or these different species. And, when you look at the lore and legends of those, they talk about how they hibernate, or they go into this caves and they sleep for hundreds of years or something. So your reports can be few and far between in between that. So what do you think about that? Is there any kind of lore or mythology up in that area that talks about that?
No, just the indigenous one. But why would theirs be too much different than anywhere else in the world, right? Like, it would make sense. I mean, so maybe here we didn't have forest dragons, but we had, dragons in the water spirits. The forests maybe were more for the ape wild men than there were for dragons, right? And same thing, like, it'd be if you take back to the medieval knight slaying a dragon, I'd hate to go into water with a suit of armor. You'd just sink at the bottom and you'd be toast. So it makes sense, right? But I do like that. I think it just speaks to that this is something that in some way, shape, or form has been culturally accepted all over the world. For as long as people have been telling stories, there's been dragons, right? There's been monsters, there's been ghosts, there's been things in the sky. At a time it was chariots of the gods. Now it's unidentified flying. Well, they're not even they're Tic Tacs and stuff like that, right? Like, these things have been around us forever, which is why I say I think it's whatever this is a natural part of the human, not even the human experience, the Earth experience. And I always go back to Colin Wilson. He wrote a book called The Occult, and he basically said it was always around us. We were way more in tune with all of it when we were on the plains. We needed our instincts to rely on to survive. We understood what it was. We interacted with it. We respected it. It respected us back. But as we became more civilized and more cultured and all this, we've stopped relying on it and aren't seeing it as much, except for a few people that are willing to let themselves tune into it. So, and I think with what happened with the pandemic, now, especially as we've moved out of it, people have, again, like we've talked about earlier, become way more accepting of the paranormal. So maybe we are going to become more in tune with it now as people seek more out of life. Because I think that's where the answers are. And I think that's where a lot of what people have been looking for spiritually rests, is in this paranormal experience all around us.
Yeah, that's another great point. If you go back and read any of the old books, like on Bigfoot or the paranormal, like you said, and stuff, a lot of them are written 100% like this is fact. Like, you read like any of the old Yeti books from the Himalayan expeditions and stuff, they talk about this creature like it's 100% fact. And I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying in the books, nowadays they say, well, if Bigfoot does exist, this is, but all the older books that you look into, it's up in the Himalayas, there's this creature, this is what it looks like, we have bodies, we have samples, and I'm not kidding, it says stuff like that in there, that they've captured them, they've seen them, they've had that. And again, we have gotten away from that, from the hunter-gatherers and stuff, like you said, that have needed to rely on our instincts and stuff out in the wild. And now we don't have to. All of our food is in the store. We drive up the road, we pick it up, we're ready to go. And we spend more time staring at our phones and computers and stuff than we do actually out there looking at this stuff and living. And that's all added up to, being this disconnect from the spiritual world and the things that are out there, that we don't believe it anymore.
And it's not even, I think, a disconnect from that. We're disconnected from ourselves. Like, what people with any mental health condition, the general consensus, aside from, reasonable therapy, is go outside more, go into nature more, turn off your screen and go, you know what I mean? And I know, like, I spent a lot of times in the wood. I grew up in the woods. I grew up on a lake. Like, I love it. And that's when I feel most in tune, even with myself. And if you're going to be more in tune with yourself, you're going to be more in tune with what's going on around you. And I think I hope there's a movement away. Like, I get it. We've developed all this technology to make our lives easier, but somewhere we've lost something of ourselves and what we're supposed to be, and our relationship with each other and the world around us. And that's me getting on a little pedestal and tooting a horn that has nothing much to do with the paranormal, but I think it does at the same time. I think that's what we've said. It's a part of our experience, and we've been denying ourselves that, and we get scared of it now because we were not supposed to believe in it. Right?
Do
But I
you
think we're a lot
honestly
less afraid of it before.
do you honestly think that our lives are better now? Because if you think about this, like, look, I mean, you have like more medicine and less people dying young and stuff like that. But on the reverse side of that, I mean, look at, when back in the day when you grew your own food, you raised your own cattle and stuff, you lived off of your own means. You were happy, you had your stuff, you worked harder, but you weren't a slave to 9-to-5 jobs and paying taxes, paying bills, making sure your lights work and all the newest technology and stuff. Do you think that we're better off now than we were back when we were just farming and hunter gatherers?
No, I don't think we are better off. I think we like to think that we are, because we've made everything. We're lazy. Like we're lazy species. So I think we've given ourselves all the conveniences we could want, but at the same time we've lost something. I think we were better even 50 years ago. I mean, and it's, people can keep going about social stuff and all this other stuff, which is fine. But I think in terms of us as a species, when we were more self-reliant, we were better off. I think we were happier. And I think then if we had something we couldn't explain come across our property, we faced it as opposed to running scared from it. Right. I think, you even hear of people who going back to Bigfoot, have cabins where they've had sightings for years. They're not scared of whatever it is. They just coexist with it. And with dog ben, I've read Aaron Deese's book about a guy with a property, I can't remember, somewhere in Texas, where something that he believes was a dogman is on his property, but it stays in its corner of the property and he stays on his, and everything's fine. So I think, I would like to get back to that. I know, if even my wife and I have talked, like, once our son's old enough and is off to university, we're packing up and getting out of the city and are going to go back into rural. I think it's just a better way to live. And then you're not questioning what you've got in your food, because you're growing it yourself, or you're hunting it and you're bringing it back and taking care of it yourself. So we've got a bit off topic, but I think we were better off before.
Have we?
No, I don't think we have. Because even look at the story I mentioned about Susan Allison, the first person to really document and see Bigfoot outside of the indigenous people. She saw something in the lake. She wrote it. I saw a dinosaur in lake. She wasn't freaked out by it. It's just something she wrote about in her journal.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's fascinating. I wonder what that is. And then went and talked to the indigenous people, and what's that? And it's Nahaiitku, and she Nakahaka, and yeah. Like, it's just that kind of a thing. It was just like, whatever.
I mean, look at a couple weeks ago now when they did that anti-cyberware update, and it literally shut down like all of Windows for like businesses and stuff. I don't know if you have that up in Canada and stuff too. I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And how everything shut down. Every factory and all these places that were running that software basically came to a grinding halt. And what does that say about where we are as a culture and stuff, that we're so reliant on this that we don't know what to do if we have what if the entire world got hit with like a solar flare or something and knocked out all of our electrical grids and internet and stuff? We'd be helpless.
And it's gonna happen sooner or later. It's gonna happen, and we're gonna be foobarred. I'm sure we probably can't swear on here, so I'll say foobarred instead. But again, that happened with the pandemic at the beginning, whenever suddenly all your supply chains are shutting down and people are panicking. When I was growing up, the town I live in, everything at the stores came from within 100 miles. We even had a Catelli plant that made our spaghetti for us. You know what I mean? But now it's all gone. And I think that's just such a mistake. With the pandemic had hit and we were back how it was back in the 70s and the 80s, everyone would have been fine. We wouldn't have been panicking. So, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. It is so terrible where we are today and what's become of it. Like you said, we've become weak. If we had to go out and hunt now, I mean, like, there'd be very few people that would survive, like, just strength wise, intelligence wise, to be able to do those things. And
just resiliency, even wise, like, just to have the resilience. Okay, this happened. What am I going to do? Now everyone, like you say, everyone just panics and stops. Whereas
Everyone pulls out their phone. Let me Google what to do in case the power goes out.
yeah, what? Oh, I can't. My phone isn't working because the Wi-Fi's down. Crap.
Exactly.
Well, you go get your wood and you heat up your wood stove and you put your pot of water on top of it and you boil yourself something to drink or some soup. That's what you do.
And hopefully you don't have an electric stove.
Yeah, I know. We have gas, and I have a coal barbecue outside, just in case such things happen. Thank you. And a wood stove.
Yep. Oh man. All right. Well, it has been amazing talking to you. I think I gotta get you back on our paranormal show as well, and talk about all things there as well if you're interested. And
I would love to, Barnaby. I've had a blast talking to you for the last hour, and I'd love to do something like that. I'll talk about anything paranormal or just general state of the world.
Apparently, yes. Who knew Ogopogo was so deep?
It is deep, not only in the lake, but I think there's a lot more to it. And I think it ties into our human experience.
I think it's been a great episode, man. I appreciate so much you coming on. And again, you got your book out here. Tell everyone where they can get it and where they can find you and all of your other documentaries and stuff.
Yeah, The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster, can be found at smalltownmonsters.com or on Amazon. Cursed Waters, physical copies you can order from Small Town Monsters, but it's also out on VOD, and I believe by now it'll be out on Amazon and probably Tubi. You can find me on Facebook as Jason Hewlett or on Instagram at Jason Hewlett Official, or come check us out at the Canadian Paranormal Society at canadianparanormalsociety.ca.
Awesome, man. Do you have any events or anything coming up? Are you going to be speaking anywhere or anything like that?
Nowhere that anyone of your company down in the States. No.
hey, we're worldwide.
We're doing a paranormal camping weekend at O'Keefe Ranch in British Columbia. Oh no, that'll be over by then. Never mind, because I remember this is coming out in September. So nothing in the docket yet. But by the time this comes out, I think we have other things that'll be lined up for fall. So sorry, not at the moment. Very good.
Check your website, check Facebook, and get all the information.
Yeah,
awesome. All right, man. Well,
thanks, Barnaby.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute blast show. I've had a lot of fun, man.
Likewise.
Right, you take care, man.
You too.
All right, guys, that is our show for this week. This wraps up. Jason is going to be my last scheduled interview at this time for Monsters on the Edge. So I don't know what's coming up next week on Monsters on the Edge. Coming up this Thursday on the Paranormal Spectrum, I have Dr. Heather Lee is joining the show. She is a pre-recorded episode talking about the Hat Man Project and all things Hat Man and creepy shadow people. It's an amazing show, a lot of sciencey paranormal stuff going on there. So if you're interested in the paranormal and Hat Man and shadow people and haunted lighthouses, make sure you tune in this Thursday for the Paranormal Spectrum. Until then, guys, thanks for watching. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Untold Radio Network. And until next time, I'll see you on the edge.